Very warm welcome to you, Annil. How have you been? I'm sorry to have kept you waiting, Annil.
Hi, Sumedha. Thanks very much. I'm absolutely fine, and not a problem. I know these events sometimes do take a little bit longer than you anticipate, so no problem at all with that.
Yeah, and I think the conversations have been so engaging that they have kind of laid the foundation of what we are about to engage on, about how new tools are going to, deliver the promise of employee experience, right, Anil? And even before I move to the tooling part, Anil, I just get down to the very crux of it, at the very, and take it head on, as to, before anyone starts to go back to their design boards, drawing boards, and architect and start looking for tools, right? The first thing I wish to check with you and take your perspective, given that you are helping so many companies across the world solutioning such critical aspects. uh, One thing that is most critical is that the intent, identify the pain points that employees are going through even before you try to find a solution to it, right? What is the trend that you see globally and global versus India? Any observations of yours? Is the intent there, or is it lacking, or is it yet to achieve a certain degree? Over to you, Anil.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, look, it's a very interesting question, and I think every business has this big challenge on how do we improve the employee experience, with the organization. So it's a very important piece of the jigsaw because businesses are made up of people, and people are your employees. They could be your customers that you work with, but employee experience often it gets dictated by the business rather than the other way around, where we're learning from the employees themselves. So I think the world, definitely the trend is moving more towards what does the employee have to say and what's the input from the employee, and how can we enable and engage with the employee better. I think that the standard things that we've all been very used to in organizations is bringing the employee into the organization, as well as then how do we develop them as they join. So everything from nailing their first day when they come to the organization, to how do you buddy them up with somebody in the business, and then open and a collaborative environment, employee development. These are all things that every organization spends quite a lot of time and effort in doing. However, what's happened is this transition, pre and post COVID, I think pandemic, we were already on this journey about flexibility, working from anywhere, working close to home, 4-day working weeks, hybrid working. So all these things were already there, starting to change in the workplace. However, the pandemic put this magnifying glass on everything and pushed everything forward very, very quickly. So I think we went into a bit of a scramble. How do we, what do we use? What tool is going to best be able to do this for? How quickly can I adapt it? And I think the default position just became video meetings. Let's do a Zoom call. Let's do, a Teams call. Let's do, a WhatsApp video call. That became the default position in getting everybody engaged, and almost try to replicate those things you were doing in an office pre-COVID. How do we now do this sitting in our homes, or sitting in a co-working space, or sitting in a cafe? How do we do this? And I think that's where organizations found a big challenge, because video meetings are great, and I think they're very good enablers for us to have this one-on-one FaceTime. However, what happens when you've finished that video meeting? How does your employee experience? What do you do? How do I engage? How do people hear my voice? How do I get heard in the business? How am I going to get personal development? Now that creates a lot of challenges with individuals which are not necessarily measured very well as organizations, which are mental aspects, cultural aspects, and so on. I think we've all been on this journey in improving the experience of an employee, and we're learning more and more about how do we get employees fitting in, with the organization's culture, how do we pick up on somebody's mental state at a particular time? And unfortunately, COVID has posed this situation where what do we do next, right? Because I think it was very euphoric that, hey, we can work from home and I got the opportunity. I won't have to travel. I won't have to spend money on buying food or coffee. I can do that all at home. I can walk to my desk. I can start my day. So I think the start was very euphoric. It was great because we proved that actually we can do this in this way. The stage, I think, where we are now and where the trend is going forward, and the fact that hybrid is here to stay, the big question mark is, how do we ensure that we can still replicate the same emotions, culture, experience for the employee when they're not in the same physical environment? And that's where I think the trends are now going with products like Wurkr, with virtual offices, with having virtual events like what we're doing today. So I think this is where the trend is definitely going in the future. And that's going to require technology, and it's going to require various tools, to be able to do that. But it's also not just a technology and a tool thing. I think it's also an environmental thing as well. Do you have to set up a space at home dedicated to work? Do you go to a co-working space close to your home rather than traveling an hour, 2 hours to get to your regular office? So I think there's quite a few things, which organizations are now realistically bringing to the forefront because of COVID, because this was happening, but it probably would have taken another decade for us to really start fast forwarding this. But COVID has put a huge magnifying glass to say, let's do this now. We have to do it because this is here to stay, not necessarily COVID, but this is here to stay in the way we're working now. And people are choosing to work this way. I think that's the other big aspect of it as well.
Thank you so much, Annil. I think you just articulated it so well. I think it's not just about, addressing the logistics bit or anything to that, it is more about the fact that you're dealing with human. The first thing that any human being looks at is being trusted, being, having a sense of purpose, and all of that with all this, hybrid scenario, that is getting shaken up, and those are the things that now needs to be addressed. It's okay what we have done so far. It has worked well, as maybe if I may choose to use the word stopgap arrangement, but we have to change our lens, right? And, and that's exactly where, people are now trying to meet that elusive work-life balance, and not just work-life balance, work balance, very foremost, right?
Yep.
So I was reading this, and there's this research which is telling me that today people are worried in a hybrid scenario that, the culture that we are keeping things, there is tiered culture shaping up in companies, right? There is one culture for the employee who is making himself present physically in the office space, and there is another culture that is shaping up for the employee who is not managing to come to office, right? So there is a huge work that needs to be there. How are you helping this cause, Annil? I think that's very grave situation that should not be happening.
Yeah, look, and again, I think the space in work in the future of work and what we're all getting adapted to now, it's a very interesting space. Just my personal background, I've come from 2 decades of seeing the office environment change. From the traditional corner office, being the prestige of, and treated differently because you had a corner office, looking out with great views of a city and stuff like that, to then almost senior management sitting in open plan offices working together because that was the right way to engage with your colleagues and your employees. And then co-working, hot desking, being able to go into various different locations and working in different locations. So I think typically, work-life balance is, personally, I think it's a bit archaic, even in the phraseology, because when you talk about work-life balance, it's often weighed heavily towards life rather than work. But, the purpose of work-life balance is to give both your work and your life, some real purpose, meaning, and balance of those two things. And I prefer to say work-life integration because that's what we're typically doing. Whereas some people would say work-life balance is just switching off as soon as you get to 5 o'clock and then you never touch your phone, you never answer an email, and let's be honest, that never happens, right? So this is about integrating, that work part of your life, and then your life and family and your social part of your life, and how does that get integrated? So I think it's always been a challenge. I don't think that there's one size that fits all, in doing that. However, again, what COVID and I guess the trend of where businesses are going now, there's hardly any line between demarcating life and work, because what this way of working and working from home, or working, in a remote way, has caused them the days to stretch. And you could be starting at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you could still be working at 8 to 10 o'clock in an evening. Now, if you're doing that, there's no way of integrating your life or having any sort of balance in your life. In fact, you're stretching, your work out so much that, you're not going to be able to give it justice, and productivity then starts getting affected because you're not being able to give it, your full. So I think, that fine line that used to be in place, unfortunately, in this new trend of how we work now, is disappearing, and disappearing fast. So I think organizations really need to focus back on how do we do that. And part of it is because I think the world has just become very small. We're working with people sitting here. I'm sitting in London, you're sitting there over in India, we've got somebody sitting in New York, that could be connecting. So your time zones are all completely mixed up, and you could be working with a team all over the globe. So how do you keep that constant? So I think there's an element of asynchronous and synchronous working. The asynchronous piece is easy. I think we've been doing that very often. The synchronous piece now today, in working in silos or working from anywhere, I think is more difficult. And that's where tools that can enable you to do that, is very, very important. The whole purpose of Wurkr when we launched was very, very simple. Is how do we recreate some of those cultural, physical, mental behaviors that we were so used to in a physical office, sitting next to your colleague, or walking over to the water cooler, or having that impromptu conversation, or tapping somebody on the shoulder and saying, hey, can you help me with this? How do we recreate that online when you're not in the same physical space? And then also, one of your colleagues earlier mentioned, that there was this disconnect between in-office and offline workers. So how do we now keep them connected? So the offline people need to be connected with the online people. So that tool is needed to give that cohesive environment. So Wurkr is very much about visual representation in real time of your colleagues, wherever they may be, whatever time zone they may be, on screen. So you can interact with them, instantly in real time. That's the real sort of, I guess, magic we've created over at Wurkr. You can still do video meetings. You can still do chat. You can still do water cooler conversations. You can still do screen sharing. You can do all those fantastic things that we're so used to today. But the real key is being able to see and almost touch and feel your colleagues when they're at work. And that's the real key differentiator of what we've been focusing our efforts on.
Bang on, Annil. I think that's very, very essential. And what you just iterated right now, one of our panelists before us, they mentioned that, the approach needs to be that of design thinking, right? But
Correct.
It's easier said than done, right? Because it's a lot of work that needs to be put in. You need to map every employee journey, get into scripting, tailored interventions, where and how, how will everything fall into a piece, and who has the time and effort. One has to have that the intent with what we began, and then that it's very, very time consuming. So, and people can have very, very disastrous effect of not attempting to do this right away. Like you said that it's we have sailed the 2 years, but those 2 years are behind us. We have to look at bigger things. You have, through your tool, or any other tool that you quoted for that matter, how do we escalate this process? How do we enable these organizations who have the intent but maybe not the time and effort that to get through this whole journey. Any thoughts around that, Anil?
Yeah, I think, look, and it was covered again in the previous, conversation. I think this is a continual development of technology, tools, processes, and so on. And so I don't think anything in that respect has changed. Us and everybody is in the same boat. We're always continually looking for new things and how do we adapt and how do we engage. I think the interesting dilemma is we're almost in a category defining time, in the world today, because where we were on a journey, to slowly adapt, be it tools, be it employee engagement, be it experiences, we were adapting it over a period of time. Suddenly, we've been forced now to, do this in a particular way, which became very difficult. And as I said, the only solution was a video meeting, essentially. But if you look at the last 5 to 10 years, there are many businesses that have become successful, large organizations that have scaled without having physical offices. They are either remotely working and they are engaging, using tools like Slack, like Teams, and so on and so forth. But the biggest challenge today is, how do I keep connected? How do I feel immersed in an environment where my colleagues are with me? That's the thing. It's okay to send a message. It's okay to share a document. It's great to have a chat. We can do that. We're so used to that. But this category defining space is a virtual office. That's something which, is certainly needed in this hybrid world. And not for one second am I advocating that the world is remote and we never leave our, rooms and we stay at home and everything is delivered to us and, we never meet anybody in person and we never leave the front door. Far from that. It has to be a balance of the two. It has to be a balance of the physical, meeting in person, spending time together. Is that close to home? Is that you traveling to a location? So I think organizations need to create almost an ecosystem of tools, ways of working, workflows that help the organization get the best. There are some people which are going to find it very challenging to go back to a physical office, just from anxiety, elements and what's happening with COVID and so on. Now, how can we bring them back in? Obviously bring them in 1 day a week, bring them in 2 days a week, but then when they're not in the office, how do you keep them engaged, that they're with their colleagues so that you do get used to spending time together? So that's where, Wurkr has been created simply for that purpose. You don't just come in when you want to come in. You come in when you come to work. So when you come into work, you come into a reception at work and it feels like you're going to work. So you come into a reception, then you walk over to either a bank of desks where your colleagues are sitting, or you go to your office and you start your day at work. But the key thing is you can see your colleagues, working away. You can see them moving around. You can see them having conversations with other people. So that curiosity factor that we always have in a physical office, is missing in this forced way of working that we're in. So to move forward, I think organizations definitely need to adopt, new technologies. I'll share a very interesting fact for you. So I did a little research on the metaverse and the future of work. And I know the metaverse is a very big topic these days, and everyone is talking about it, and it seems to be that elusive word that certainly is being brought to the table. But Lenovo did a study of about 7,500 people, and they were talking about how working adults across US, UK, and I think Brazil, Singapore, China, and a couple of other locations. They did this study, and they looked at how many people are prepared to work in the metaverse. And if people understand what the metaverse is, this is a virtual, almost reality space. Interestingly, of the 7,500 people that were interviewed and the surveys took place, 44% of them were willing to work in a metaverse. Now, the metaverse is still the future, right? Now, we're here and we can work in a real face-to-face fashion like we're doing in this virtual event we can do that with tools like Wurkr in a virtual office. But the audience, our employees of the future, are willing to work in the metaverse to be able to do this. So it's very interesting, where technology is going. I think on the one hand, we have to be very mindful, of how we adapt new technologies. But on the other side, we've got to definitely listen to our employees and understand what they want, so then we can look for solutions which best enable them to get the best out of their working days. And I think that's the key thing. Listening to your employees, I think, is a very, very key part of how we adapt going forward, because everyone's learned quite a lot over the last 2 years, and there's a lot of knowledge that can be sort of transferred over for us to be able to utilize. And I think that's the bit we need to capture. It'd be great to do a global study of how people are actually working through the last 2 years, the pros, the cons, and where we're going. I think that will give us a very interesting viewpoint on the things we need to do. But the rest of it, all of us are just doing, well, I'll do this today, I'll do that tomorrow, I need to bring this in, maybe we'll take that step. So we're all adapting to it on the fly rather than planning. So the future is planning, but listening to the employees and understanding how they want to engage and work together. Because I don't think anybody really wants to travel an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to an office. And then you've got the climate and environmental issue that relates to that as well. But that's another topic in itself.
No, brilliantly put in, Annil. I think the one word that really struck me hard is that you are helping organizations drive away the anxiety of the employee, right? And that anxiety could be around anything, whether it's about traveling or whether about delivering a project, whether about meeting or not meeting their colleagues, having those, water cooler conversations. Yes. And that anxiety, it's like a slow poison, and if it is not being dealt with.
Yeah.
So great, Annil. It was great conversing with you. And I'm sure we kept the best for the last. And we'll, kind of conclude at this juncture where we leave these parting thoughts with my audience here that, yes, the one thing that needs to be dealt with and the intent has to be put behind is that how to drive away anxiety and deliver the best employee experience such that you give the best experience, pass it on to your customers as well.
Thank you, Sumedha. It's been brilliant speaking to you. Thanks again.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.